Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai, and today we're going to be air layering my 50-year-old apple tree. So this is the apple tree that we're going to be working on here today. This tree is 50 years old, grown from seed by my grandmother when my dad was born, which is about 54 years ago. And because this tree was grown in a pot all its life, it never really got the chance to grow super tall like a big apple tree would. This tree wasn't originally grown as a bonsai tree. This was just an ordinary garden tree in a pot that was pruned any old way every year. And that's how it ended up to be in this really unique looking design of a tree, which I really like. And I think this year is the healthiest that I've ever seen this tree. It's got lots of healthy leaves all over it, and definitely a lot more leaves than last year. Last year it was just sort of coming and recovering from so many repots one after another. And now in bonsai, I firmly believe that no matter what tree that you work on, there is more than one option when it comes to the design of the tree. And this tree is a great example. This tree has so many options and possibilities of what we could do with it. For example, one option would be to leave the entire tree intact and develop it in that lovely classical bonsai triangular shape. And that definitely is an option with this tree, but the reason why I decided against this option is with that classic bonsai triangular shape on a big tree like this, the trunk tends to have a little bit of taper in it where it goes from thick to thin up to the top, and this tree just doesn't have that, and I'm not really the biggest fan of the same thickness of trunk the whole way up. Another option would be to just take a saw to this tree and cut it right down at the base here, or even to a lower branch here, and allow that next branch to become the leader of the tree and the next apex, and then develop branches off of that to have a little short bonsai tree that's more in proportion with the thickness of the trunk in relation to the height of the tree. And that's kind of what we're going to do here today, but instead of chopping the tree, we're going to make use of what we chop off. Today what we're going to do is what's known as an air layering, and an air layering is essentially taking a branch or a piece of a tree's trunk and making that into an entirely new tree. So what I'm thinking of doing is air layering this top section here and having this as a little small bonsai from there up, and then maybe in the future as this tree develops we could take more and more air layerings down the trunk until we have it down to here with that original trunk chop that we could have considered. And personally I think the top of this tree here has the most interest, as it has all these knobbly pieces on the trunk which add so much character to a tree. And the tools that we'll be using to air layer this tree today are some branch cutters, gin pliers, some scissors, wire cutters, a grafting knife, or you can use just an ordinary box cutter, and finally some 2mm bonsai wire. We're going to start by removing some branches. The reason for doing this is so that I can actually get in and do an air layering, as there's quite a lot going on around this spot. So I'm going to go with the branch cutters and just chop off some branches that I think are in the way. Just clearing out this area, and all of these off cuttings that you do take can be easily made into cuttings. Just put a little bit of hormone rooting powder, stick it in soil, and it will root. Now we're going to come in with the grafting knife and begin to cut 2 lines to strip off the bark. Because there's a lot of these nodules, it may be a little bit tricky, but I'm sure we can work around it. I think with the branch cutters we can cut some of these nodules off just to access the trunk. I think this is where I'm going to make the top line, and in air layering you want to make sure the top line is the cleanest, as that's where the roots will come from. So I'm just gonna come around here, then I'm coming around the back. And now whenever you do this, you want to make sure that your grafting knife is both clean and sharp. You want it sharp so that you have a really good cut, and you want it clean so that nothing gets infected. So now we've got a line the whole way around the trunk, and I'm going to move down about the same thickness of the tree. So the tree's this thick, so I'm going to come down to about here, and again we can cut off this nodule. It's not going to be in the final design. And it's okay to do this kind of work on an apple. Apple trees are very resilient and can handle hard pruning like this. It's still good to make this bottom line nice and clean, although it doesn't have to be. And then when both rings are made, we can just do a line right down the middle between them and begin to peel the bark off of the tree. Sometimes this can be easier to do just with your nail by peeling it off. As you can see here, I've got a part peeled off there. Here's another nodule, which I think can be cut flush. None of these parts that we're cutting are going to make it really into the final design, so it's okay. Because of all these nodules, I think this is the trickiest air layering that I've ever done. And when you air layer, you will notice under the bark on the outside, there's a little thin layer, a little white layer that's just on top of the wood here. If you scrape it like this, you'll see it peel off. That's what's known as the cambium layer, and it's really important that you get this all off the whole way around the trunk. As a last resort, the tree will send roots out along here. And from what I know, apple trees air layer very easily. And because this is where roots is going to come from, along here, I feel like this branch is just doesn't belong here anymore, so we'll just cut that. So now that this is completely ringed the whole way around the trunk, you can sort of begin to see what the little bonsai tree will look like once this is removed from the tree in about 8 weeks' time. I think it looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is just spray some water all around here. And this is just to get the rooting hormone to stick to this part of the trunk because it's a powder. And I'm just going to spread the rooting hormone above the top line, as that is where the roots come from. They don't come from down here, or they don't come from the wood. They'll come from the bark just above it. I know some people will cover everything in it, but there's really no need for that. And sometimes, I think even with apple trees, maybe you don't even need rooting hormone, but I'm doing this just because I really want to ensure that it will root. And the rooting hormone that I'm using today has the active ingredient IBA, which stands for indole-3 butyric acid. And I find this works really good on maples, apple trees, Fuji cherries. It also works really well for azalea cuttings. So I just got a basin of water here, and we're going to prepare the moss ball of sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss is really fantastic for air layerings as it holds a lot of moisture around the place where you want roots to grow. It's also antifungal, antibacterial, so the tree's less likely to rot around that area. I really love sphagnum in bonsai. It really helps things grow a lot. And I think someone said in the comments that I was pronouncing sphagnum wrong. It's pronounced with an F sound, like sphagnum. So thanks for that. I'll probably still say sphagnum because that's what I'm used to, but if I remember, I'll say sphagnum. I'm just gonna put this into the water so that the moss is nice and moist. And I'm breaking it up like this so that whenever the roots develop, they can find their way through the little bits of sphagnum. And this is the plastic that I'll be using to wrap the tree in. So I'm just gonna begin by cutting off the top. So I think the amount of plastic will probably be maybe that much. Some people use clear plastic and some people use black plastic. Each of them have their benefits and disadvantages. With clear plastic, as the roots develop, you can easily see through the plastic if they're growing or not and when it's time to take it off. With black plastic, you can't see that. But then the advantage with black plastic is, I think that whenever you have clear plastic wrapped around the moss ball, there's more of a chance of algae developing, as sun can photosynthesize algae through the plastic. So what I like to do is do the air layering in clear plastic so I can see what's going on, and then after that wrap it in a little bit of black plastic so I can just peek under that without disturbing the roots too much. So we've got a long piece of plastic, and I would just like to wring out here. So I don't want the moss too wet. So I'm just going to put the moss on the plastic like this and hold it with my hand. Sometimes you need two people to do this, but I've done quite a lot of air layering, so I think I've got a little bit of practice in. And just before we do this, I'm going to cut little lengths of wire. Just 2 is all we need. So 1, 2. So I'm coming around the back of the trunk first. And I want to make sure that all of that moss is nice and tidy at the bottom. I want lots of moss up around there. Then with my other hand, I'm just squeezing some moss out of the bowl and bringing that up here to wrap around. And you can't have too much moss, so don't worry about that if you think that it might be a little bit too big. And I'm just going to wrap it over to secure it all in place and bring this part back around. So it's loosely on there at the moment, and holding it with my hand, I'm now going to take a little piece of wire. I'm going to come around this way. I'm just going to make sure that's nice and tight. Not too tight, but tight enough that water won't escape. So once you have one of them done, you can come in with the gin pliers and give it a little tighten. Now that makes things a lot easier, as we can just push the moss down with our hands here. And we can actually get more moss in the top. And then with that, I'm going to come in with the second piece of wire and just tie it off. I'm not too fussed on cutting these pieces of wire, as it's not for presentation purposes. That will make it easier to unwind whenever we take it off. So I'm going to wrap this now in a black plastic bag. I suppose the added insulation of the black plastic bag will help it also. I have seen some people wrap their air layerings in bubble wrap, and they've had pretty quick air layerings root that way. It doesn't have to look the prettiest, just a little bit of black plastic to keep the sun off that. And I'm gonna keep this one on with some 1/2 mil wire. I don't think you can get it designed for bonsai. This is just some craft wire. This air layering should take approximately 6 to 8 weeks to root in this moss ball. And on that, I'm going to end off this air layering video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like on this video. It really helps out the channel a lot and the YouTube algorithm. Please let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Is there anything that you would do differently? I'm always open to new and different ideas and different ways of doing things. If you would like to support me and the things that I do on this channel, hit the thanks button down below. And if you would like to stay updated on all of the things that I do off camera, please follow me on Instagram. It's @NotionBonsai, and you'll be able to see all of the things that I do on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.